Oh, what a difference a year can make. This time last year, we were jumping for joy, celebrating the Philadelphia 76ers as the biggest winners of the NBA offseason after handing Paul George a full-scale max contract straight up in free agency. Well, now the team finished with the fifth worst record in the NBA, with George only being available for 42 games and not looking like the best version of himself during that stretch. Now we're faced with some decisions for the Sixers franchise and a more telling offseason than I think any of us could have expected to be this point. I want to talk about Paul George specifically in this video and what is the outlook from here specifically. Is there a world where the Sixers move on from him? Is there a world where he returns to the all-star caliber player of himself that we've seen in past seasons? And what is the best direction for the team overall? First, I want to start off with what exactly Paul George produced last season. We're talking 16.2 points per game, 5.3 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 1.8 steals per game, shot 43% from the field, 35.8% from three, just 27.7% from the corner three opportunities, which was a shocking number to me. That has been an area throughout his career, and particularly last season, has been a significant strength of George, and something that I thought was going to be a great fit next to Joel Embiid. Now, to get my full opinion on the Paul George situation here, he was not good last year. There's no way around acknowledging that. He was not worth the contract that he was handed, but I do think that it's the overall perception of Paul George is worse than the actuality. To be completely fair to the guy, he did suffer two pretty painful looking just knee issues in the start of preseason. That first bone bruise that he sustained, when I watched that live, I thought, there goes the season. This man just tore his ACL. Thankfully, that was not the case, and he was able to fight through. But it was re-injured. He also had a groin injury. He also had an injury to his shooting hand that he was dealing with there. There was a lot thrown his direction, and that not even including moving across the country, having to deal with his house being on fire due to those LA fires out there, and a couple other personal issues that I have heard that he was dealing with this season. There was a lot that went on with Paul George. That does not excuse the performance on the floor, but I do think we got to set the table properly here. And the other point that I do want to make clear, Paul George was brought in here to be Robin. This was not him to come in and the Sixers are Paul George's team. He was supposed to be a clean fit next to Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. To call a spade, where this season went off the rails was with the lack of availability from Joel Embiid, and I don't think it is fair to hold that against Paul George. Even down the home stretch of the season where obviously the Sixers had shifted their intentions of tanking, the goal was to maximize their odds of keeping that draft pick, which we still have to send every prayer in the universe for on May 12th. Paul George could have played more games than he did there. That if they needed to win basketball games or wanted to improve their outlook, I am confident Paul George would have stepped on the floor during that closing stretch of the season. Now, nonetheless, Paul George did speak with the media himself, first in the wise way of words that he does have. He stated, quote, "We didn't see ourselves being 13th in the East," which I think is quite the understatement there, but he did speak some belief in this team having a return. He said, quote, "I think we can be a team in the future that can compete for a championship. On what outside of health it takes to get there, quote, continuity, identity, knowing who we are when we step on the floor. I think that carries us." And obviously that did not come together this season. I will say Tyrese Maxey during his press interview spoke a ton about how him, Paul, and Joel specifically need to get together and work out in the offseason. That it is not good enough to just text each other on the phone, talk on the phone, kind of bounce ideas off each other. They need to actually be on the hardwood together, and I do hope that is the case. And by the way, with Joel Embiid's recovery, by the end of the summer, he should be available for basketball action, and maybe that'll be a sense when we start to get an idea of his health status as well. Let's not get ahead of ourselves with that. But one of the pitches or one of the appeals of this offseason was that very phrase that Paul George hit on right there. Continuity. This has been something that Joel Embiid himself has brought up plenty of times in regards to the Sixers team. And in fairness to Joel, he's correct. There has not been a lot of continuity within this roster. There's been a ton of players cycled through the past decade of Sixers basketball as the roster is attempted to be improved. We saw a half a season with Jimmy Butler. We gave James Harden a try. There were a ton of trades that did cycle through. The Al Horford situation. You can go down the list of changes that were made within this franchise, but the pitch was this last offseason that was the all-in push. You bring in Paul George. You give Tyrese Maxey the max. You give Joel Embiid an extension. Caleb Martin was initially expected to be a part of this core here, and you can have a couple years to develop together. It is incredibly rare that a team is put together in one season and all of a sudden they're championship contenders. It often takes time, and obviously the Sixers are hoping that is the case because even under the most modest of beliefs or expectations for this season, it was a failure. We have to acknowledge that. Now, the immediate frustration here is very clearly we need to move on from Paul George. Paul George needs to be traded from the Philadelphia 76ers, and I get that. I would not do it for a couple reasons. For starters, let's take a peek at that very contract. And I know some of you are going to directly point to this as a reason for why he should be traded, but walk with me here. So with his contract, he completed the first season, made $49 million this season. He's on the books for $51 million next year, $54 million the following year, and $56.5 million player option in the 27-28 season. That is a lot of money, and every other team in the NBA is well aware of that as well. And with the NBA rules as far as making trades, you have to find a way to bring back that amount of money. So the one pitch that I've seen floating out there fairly regularly is attaching the Sixers draft pick to Paul George's contract to get off it. So meaning, say the draft pick falls, pick number 5. You give the 5th pick and Paul George to a team for whatever money makes it worth, and you get him off the books. I just don't think he's that much of a negative for that to be remotely worth it. And for me, the number one priority this season absolutely has to be bringing in a young talent. I want the guy that could potentially bridge the gap between these eras of Sixers basketball, that could start this young core next to Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain. That is far more important to me than trying to move off Paul George's contract. Now, the other side of things here is if it is another big ticket swing. And I will say, looking around the rest of the NBA, shout out to the Phoenix Suns and Dallas Mavericks for making me feel a little bit better about this Sixers franchise, because boy, there is some tough stuff coming out of both there. Nico Harrison, I feel so bad for Mavericks fans just straight up for every direction this season has gone, and Nico Harrison just continues to make it worse and worse, with most recently a closed door, no recordings, no cameras, interview with selected media there. And then with the Phoenix Suns is really the conversation that we can have here, as they are ready to blow things up. This is another situation where it was a bad owner, the new owner syndrome, where they're ready to make waves, make headlines, and ultimately it does not deliver. And now they're on the brink of fully blowing things up. The two names that pop to the surface here are Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. I'll start with Kevin Durant. And to talk about KD specifically, the latest report that we do have, this from Evan Sidri here, who tweets, the Suns privately admit that they made a mistake not telling Kevin Durant he was about to be traded at February's deadline, per Brian Windhorst. Rich Kleiman and Durant are flying to Phoenix this week to work out his immediate future with the organization. So obviously we heard Durant's name pop up in trade talks. I am not here to make the case that Paul George is a better basketball player than Kevin Durant. But what is a concern and what we have to be fully aware of here, it is really difficult for Kevin Durant to be traded, man. With the new CBA, with the restrictions that are applied, and the Suns have been the team that have said, screw it, we're going deep into the second apron, we're paying whatever fines, we're paying all the luxury tax, and we're going to deal with the restrictions when we have to. Well, now you have to if you want to move this guy, and that means that they can't take, it's very limited. It's about the salary they can take back. It's going to take, at minimum, a third team. Just eyeballing it, and I haven't dove into the weeds, it's most likely going to be at least a 4-team trade just to find a way to make this fluent, and that all has to connect with the dollar signs being proper, having the contracts to make this trade even go through. I just don't see a world in which that's like a legitimate option for this Sixers team. And by the way, to reflect on the exact contract for Kevin Durant there, not too much friendlier here, making $51 million next season, $54 the following, and then will be an unrestricted free agent. So if you really want to make the case here, you're probably looking at this as you get 2 seasons off of Paul George's contract, or 1 season off of Paul George's contract, and then obviously getting the better player as well. I also don't think the Suns are just going to do a 1-for-1 trade, even in this theoretical conversation. They're going to want draft picks back. They're going to want young talent that, whether or not they want to admit it, they have to enter some sort of rebuild and begin to build for the future there. And I don't want the Sixers to sacrifice any of that for the driving force to get off Paul George. If the worst case scenario, if Paul George just sticks around and clogs up that percentage of the salary cap while you keep adding, you allow Jared McCain to take on more offensive responsibility, you allow Tyrese Maxey to continue, whoever this draft pick is, whether it is a VJ Edgecombe or Cooper Flagg or Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, you go down the list of what players this Sixers team could end up with. If you have those 3 young talents, I can put up with Paul George just being around. He's not going to actively harm the Sixers team. He just not might be the superstar that we were hoping could be the case at this stage in his career. And another guy that I am certain is not the superstar that the team wanted him to be is Bradley Beal. To jump into that contract before I get into Beal specifically here, we're talking about him on the books for $50 million next year, $53 million in 25-26, a $57 million player option in the 26-27 season. And let's not forget that this man has a no-trade clause, meaning he fully dictates his future. And that is going to be a pretty fascinating little battle to watch internally there, as the Suns are clearly going to want to try and trade Bradley Beal. And Bradley Beal is clearly not going to want to be traded by the Phoenix Suns. And in this rare case here, the player does hold the cards, that he is in control of his destiny. So it will be fascinating how that plays out. I don't want to remotely hear the concept of Bradley Beal ever putting on a Sixers jersey. That I truly think that is one of the biggest cancers that any team in the NBA has had, and a guy that his style of basketball purely equates to losing. Look at his track record, and if you want a quote that purely points things out to me, it is this one from Bradley Beal. That quote from Gambo, who's a very on top of things, Suns reporter there, and Chris Haynes, that Bradley Beal reportedly had an issue with Mike Budenholzer telling him to play like Drew Holiday. Quote, "Don't ever disrespect me like that. Don't ever tell me to play like another player." Well, Bradley, you've come off the bench. They benched you. They've done all these other things to try and force you out. Maybe just listen to the message a little bit. And for Beal specifically, he was maddening to watch for me this year. I see him smiling when they're losing. I see no defensive effort pretty much ever. He's a guy who his style of basketball does not equate to winning. Paul George has his flaws, but he is not Bradley Beal when it comes to all that stuff. And I don't think there is a team where Bradley Beal can exist on and actively help them win games. So with that all being said, I don't see any appeal to that being. And even if your pitch is, it is about the contract and the dollar figures and at least cutting it down a season, I once again shift back to the stance of it doesn't make any sense to me for this Sixers team to sacrifice young talent or draft picks just to get off the Paul George contract. Is there a world where a trade would pop up where it does make sense? I certainly think that is the case. But we got to be direct and upfront about the fact that every other team saw exactly how this Sixers season went. That they watched Paul George on the floor as well. They saw him putting up numbers since before he was this version of Paul George. We're talking early days of the Pacers. That's how bad some of these splits were. I'm confident that he'll be better next season. I don't think he will ever be the max contract Paul George that we did get, but I do think from the Sixers direction and this really being more of a logistic-driven video and opinion here, the best move is just to hold on and hope for better results next year. There's also a world, in the same way we're talking about this Bradley Beal contract, that, you know, you're looking at it to lower the dollar figure. If we fast forward to this time next year, all of a sudden Paul George isn't looking that bad as a trade target. If he does have a better season, and that's obviously another year off the contract, maybe we're in a little better footing from a negotiation standpoint. And obviously the expectations for the Sixers will change in a great deal based on how this season went. So a lot more moving parts in regards to that overall situation. But my takeaway is I fully expect Paul George to be back in a Sixers uniform next year. And I think that's the right decision from Daryl Morey, to be perfectly honest. But would love to hear from you guys in the comments. I'm sure there are plenty of you out there who disagree with my thoughts on that. So give me your top reasons. Why is it that they should be willing to give things in addition to Paul George just to move off the contract? Because I don't see any route in which there is this one-for-one swap or, you know, a move to benefit the Sixers team in that regard. But hit me up with your thoughts in the comments. As always, appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning in this video here. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.